Hello everyone. I'm the Crime Teller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, relax, and let's delve into tonight's true crime stories. Case 1. The arid wind of Somalia whipped at the makeshift tent, carrying with it the scent of dust and a pervasive and underlying current of fear. Michael Scott Moore, a freelance American journalist, shifted on the worn mat, his gaze fixed on the sliver of moon struggling to pierce the inky blackness above. It was October 2012, and he had been a captive of Somali pirates for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, only a few days had passed since the brutal dawn ambush. He had come to report on a different kind of story, the illicit economy of piracy itself, a deep dive into the lives of the young men who, driven by desperation and a lack of viable alternatives, turned to hijacking ships for ransom. The bitter irony of his current predicament was not lost on him. Moore was no stranger to dangerous assignments. A seasoned reporter with a sharp intellect and an insatiable curiosity, he had built a career on seeking out the untold stories, the human element behind complex global issues. His previous work had taken him to conflict zones and challenging environments, but Somalia, with its fractured government and deeply entrenched pirate networks, presented a unique and unpredictable peril. He was in Galkayo, a town notorious as a hub for pirate activity, conducting interviews, carefully piecing together the tapestry of this dark industry. He understood the risks, the inherent volatility of operating in a region where lawlessness often held sway. Yet, he believed the story was vital, a window into a world few truly understood. His captors were a motley crew, a band of young men hardened by a life of scarcity and violence. They were the face of a desperate generation, their youth stolen by a nation's collapse. Their leader, known as Mohammed, was a figure of quiet menace, his eyes reflecting a chilling blend of calculated ruthlessness and, at times, a flicker of something akin to weariness. These were not the romanticized pirates of fiction. They were men driven by the brutal realities of survival, their actions born of a system that offered little else. They were armed, unyielding, and their demands were clear: a king's ransom for the American's life. The initial days of captivity were a blur of disorientation and terror. Moore was snatched from a vehicle, the suddenness of the assault leaving him reeling. The sounds of gunfire, the rough hands dragging him, the roar of engines fading into the vast emptiness of the Somali interior. It was a sensory assault that imprinted itself deeply. He was moved frequently, a tactic to evade any potential rescue attempts, forced to endure long, grueling journeys under the scorching sun, his body aching, his spirit battling despair. The pirates, though unpredictable, largely adhered to a brutal efficiency. They understood the value of their hostage, and while physical intimidation was a constant companion, direct violence was usually reserved as a last resort, a tool to pressure his family and the German security firm he had been traveling with. The demands for ransom were astronomical, a sum that stretched far beyond the means of his family or the resources of the German firm. This initiated a painstaking, agonizing negotiation process, a battle of wills played out across continents. On one side, the desperate captors, seeing in Moore their ticket to a better life, or at least a temporary reprieve from their grinding poverty. On the other, his family, a network of supporters, and a highly specialized hostage negotiation team, working tirelessly to secure his release. The lines of communication were tenuous, often relying on intermediaries, each message fraught with tension and ambiguity. Every delay, every perceived obstacle, was met with renewed threats, a chilling reminder of Moore's precarious existence. Life in captivity settled into a grim routine. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. Moore was confined, often in a cramped, unsanitary enclosure, under constant armed guard. He learned to conserve his energy, both physical and mental. He studied his captors, observing their habits, their internal dynamics, trying to understand the rhythms of their world. He engaged them in conversation when he could, cautiously, attempting to bridge the vast cultural and ideological chasm that separated them. He discovered that some of the younger guards were barely more than boys, their bravado masking a profound ignorance of the world beyond their immediate struggle. He saw the drugs, the cot chewing, the idle hours filled with a mixture of boredom and simmering aggression. The psychological toll was immense. The isolation, the uncertainty, the constant threat of violence, it chipped away at his resilience. He faced mock executions, designed to break his spirit and accelerate the ransom payments. He endured periods of severe illness, exacerbated by the harsh conditions and lack of proper medical care. He wrote in his head, mentally composing dispatches, keeping his mind sharp, a desperate act of defiance against the encroaching despair. He thought of his family, the agony they must be enduring, the weight of their love becoming both a source of strength and an immense burden. The investigation process, if it could be called that in the traditional sense, was a labyrinthine endeavor. Given the absence of a strong central government in Somalia and the pervasive lawlessness, direct law enforcement intervention was virtually impossible. The primary focus shifted to intelligence gathering and the delicate art of negotiation. International agencies, intelligence operatives, and private security firms were involved, all operating in the shadows, navigating the treacherous landscape of clan loyalties, shifting alliances, and deep-seated mistrust. The goal was to pinpoint Moore's location, to identify the specific pirate group holding him, and to establish a viable channel for communication and negotiation. This required a network of informants, careful analysis of intercepted communications, and a deep understanding of the complex socio-political dynamics of the region. The timeline of the kidnapping was agonizingly protracted. October 2012, his abduction. Months passed, filled with fits and starts in the negotiations. False hopes were raised, only to be dashed by the intractable demands of the pirates. The world outside, for Moore, became a distant echo. He measured time by the shifting shadows, the changing faces of his guards, the ebb and flow of their moods. The psychological warfare waged by his captors was relentless, designed to erode his will, to make him believe that he had been forgotten, abandoned. But despite the despair, something deep within him refused to break. He clung to the hope of release, to the belief that his family was fighting for him. As the second year of his captivity drew to a close, a breakthrough, however incremental, began to emerge. The prolonged negotiations, the relentless pressure from various angles, and perhaps a growing fatigue on the part of the captors, slowly began to wear down their resolve. The initial astronomical ransom demands were gradually chipped away, although the final sum remained substantial. The intricacies of the payout, involving a complex network of intermediaries and a precisely choreographed exchange, underscored the immense risks involved. Every step was meticulously planned, every contingency considered, in an environment where trust was a luxury and betrayal a constant threat. And then, after 819 days, the day came. In September 2014, the news, long awaited and prayed for, finally broke. Michael Scott Moore was free. The exact details of his release remain shrouded in the necessary secrecy that accompanies such sensitive operations, but it was understood to be the result of a significant ransom payment and the culmination of an arduous, multifaceted effort. He emerged from the desert, gaunt but alive, his body bearing the scars of his ordeal, but his spirit, remarkably, unbroken. The aftermath was a journey of healing, both physical and psychological. The world watched, captivated by his story of resilience. Moore, true to his journalistic instincts, would later recount his experiences, offering a harrowing and insightful account of his captivity, a testament to the human capacity for endurance in the face of unimaginable adversity. His kidnapping, a stark reminder of the perils faced by journalists in conflict zones, also cast a harsh light on the enduring problem of piracy off the coast of Somalia, a complex issue rooted in poverty, a lack of governance, and the desperate struggle for survival in a broken land. Michael Scott Moore's 2 years in the heart of the Somali wilderness became a chilling chapter in the annals of true crime, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the human cost of a world still grappling with lawlessness and despair. Case 2. The dust, thick and ochre, swirled around them. an ever-present veil over the parched earth of Somaliland. It clung to their clothes, found its way into every crease of their skin, and metaphorically settled deep in their hearts. For the Isaac people, living under the iron fist of Siad Barre's regime in the late 1980s, the dust was a harbinger of the storm, a visual metaphor for the suffocation that was slowly, inexorably, tightening around them. The dictator, Mohammed Siad Barre, had seized power in 1969, promising progress and unity. But his vision of Somalia was a monolithic one, a nation forged in his image, and any deviation from his increasingly authoritarian rule was met with swift, brutal repression. The Isaac, a prominent clan primarily inhabiting the northern regions, had always been a source of unease for Barre. Their historical trading prowess, their intellectual class, and their strong sense of communal identity made them a potential challenge to his centralized authority. Whispers of dissent, no matter how faint, were amplified in the echo chambers of his paranoia. The early 1980s saw a growing crackdown. Public gatherings were viewed with suspicion, freedom of expression was curtailed, and those perceived as critics vanished into the labyrinthine prison system. But it was the formation of the Somali National Movement (SNM) in 1981, largely composed of Isaac exiles and dissidents, that truly ignited Barre's fury. The SNM, initially advocating for the restoration of democracy and later for the secession of Somaliland, became the regime's ultimate enemy, and by extension, the entire Isaac clan was painted with the same broad brush of sedition. Barre, a man steeped in the brutal logic of collective punishment, saw no distinction between armed rebels and their civilian kin. His ideology was simple. If you were Isaac, you were an enemy, or at best, a potential one. The perpetrators were not a single entity, but a faceless, ruthless machine, powered by Barre's absolute authority and fueled by a pervasive culture of fear and obedience. The Somali National Army, particularly units like the Red Berets Dubcas and the Victory Pioneers Gulwadale, became the instruments of this state-sponsored terror. Their ranks were filled with young men, some indoctrinated with the regime's propaganda, others simply desperate for survival and following orders. The chilling aspect of this perpetration was its systemic nature, not the random acts of a few rogue soldiers, but a deliberate, centrally orchestrated campaign. Commanders like General Mohammed Said Hersey Morgan, Barre's son-in-law, were later implicated in overseeing the atrocities in the north, their names etched in the collective memory of the survivors as symbols of unimaginable cruelty. These men, far from being unthinking cogs, were often driven by ambition, loyalty to the dictator, or a twisted sense of national duty as defined by Barre. Their profiles were varied, but their shared characteristic was a willingness to execute the horrific commands of a regime that had normalized brutality. The victims, countless and anonymous in their suffering, were the ordinary people of Somaliland. They were farmers tilling the unforgiving soil, merchants navigating the bustling souks, teachers striving to enlighten young minds, mothers nurturing their children, elders imparting wisdom. They were fathers, brothers, sisters, and sons. They were civilians, going about their lives, their only crime being their clan affiliation. The Isaac, resilient and proud, found themselves caught in a vice, squeezed between the escalating conflict between the SNM and the government, and the regime's increasingly brutal retaliation. These were not combatants. They were the collateral damage of a dictator's paranoia, transformed into direct targets. Their faces, often unseen by the wider world, were etched with the quiet dignity of those facing an incomprehensible horror. They were individuals with dreams, families, and futures, all summarily extinguished. The timeline of the massacre unfolded with a terrifying, escalating rhythm, a drumbeat of death that grew louder with each passing month. It began subtly, with increased military presence in Isaac-dominated areas, checkpoints proliferating, and arbitrary arrests becoming commonplace. The whispers of disappearances grew louder, then the first reports of extrajudicial killings. Late 1987, the early signs were ominous. Military operations intensified in the north, ostensibly to counter SNM incursions. However, the operations soon began to target civilian populations. Reports of villages being shelled and agricultural lands destroyed emerged. The rationale was simple: deny the S&M any potential civilian support or resources. This was the initial phase of scorched earth tactics. Early 1988, the violence escalated dramatically. Following a major S&M offensive, Barre's regime unleashed a disproportionate and indiscriminate response. Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland and a major ISAC stronghold, became the focal point of the regime's wrath. Artillery and aerial bombardments, initially aimed at S&M positions, soon rained down on civilian areas, flattening homes, mosques, and markets. The sky, once a familiar expanse, became a source of terror, filled with the roar of MiG fighter jets and the thud of bombs. Residents of Hargeisa, caught in the inferno, desperately sought refuge. Many fled to the outskirts, hoping to escape the relentless shelling. But the horror followed them. Ground troops, including the notorious Red Berets, moved in, systematically rounding up young men, often executing them on the spot or marching them to mass graves. Women and children were often spared immediate execution, but were subjected to unspeakable brutality, including sexual violence and forced displacement. The sheer scale of destruction was unprecedented. Hargeisa was reduced to rubble, a ghostly monument to state-sponsored savagery. May-June 1988. The systematic nature of the killings became chillingly clear. Accounts from survivors painted a horrifying picture. Entire families wiped out, wells poisoned, livestock slaughtered, and crops burned. The objective was not just to defeat the S&M, but to eradicate the very fabric of ISAC society. In Bureau, another significant town, similar patterns of bombardment, mass arrests, and executions were reported. The killing fields expanded across the northern regions. Checkpoints became death traps, where individuals were identified by their clan, pulled from vehicles, and summarily executed. The smell of death hung heavy in the air. Late 1988, early 1989, as the S&M gained more ground and international condemnation began to mount, albeit slowly and reluctantly, the regime's desperation intensified, leading to even greater atrocities. The period saw more targeted killings, often disguised as anti-insurgency operations. The scale of the displacement was immense, with hundreds of thousands of ISAC fleeing across the border into Ethiopia, becoming refugees in their own homeland. The exodus was a desperate gamble for survival, a testament to the unbearable conditions they had endured. The investigation process, in any traditional sense, was non-existent at the time of the massacre. The perpetrators were the state itself, and their actions were cloaked in a veil of official secrecy and absolute power. There were no independent police forces to document crimes, no courts to prosecute, and certainly no international bodies with the mandate or the will to intervene effectively. The initial investigation was carried out by the victims themselves and the international human rights organizations working covertly or from outside Somalia. Reports, smuggled out by brave individuals, became the primary source of information, documenting the horrors with meticulous, albeit dangerous, detail. These early reports, often fragmented and difficult to verify in the midst of the ongoing conflict, served as crucial testimonies. They detailed mass graves, identified specific military units involved, and named commanders responsible. These nascent efforts laid the groundwork for future accountability, even if it seemed a distant dream at the time. After the collapse of Siad Barre's regime in 1991 and the subsequent declaration of independence by Somaliland, a more formal, albeit challenging, investigation began. The newly formed Somaliland government, with limited resources but immense determination, undertook the arduous task of excavating mass graves. Teams of forensic anthropologists and international experts arrived, working alongside local communities to unearth the truth. The discovery of numerous mass graves, filled with the skeletal remains of men, women, and children, provided irrefutable physical evidence of the genocide. Bullet casings, blindfolds, and evidence of torture corroborated the survivor testimonies. The process was slow, hampered by the sheer scale of the atrocity, the passage of time, and the devastation of the infrastructure. Identifying victims was a painstaking process, often relying on personal effects found with the remains or DNA comparisons with surviving relatives. The documentation of the crimes was meticulous, with every bone, every artifact, cataloged and preserved as evidence. However, justice for the victims remained elusive. Syed Bar himself died in exile in 1995, never facing trial. Many of the key perpetrators, those commanders and officials who orchestrated and executed the massacres, also escaped prosecution, either fleeing the country, dying before accountability could be sought, or remaining within the complex political landscape of the region. The international community, often slow to act during the height of the genocide, has also been criticized for its delayed response and limited engagement in the pursuit of justice. The legacy of the ISAC genocide continues to cast a long shadow over Somaliland. The wounds are deep, but the memory is fiercely protected. Memorials stand as poignant reminders of the unspeakable cruelty endured, and the annual commemoration serves as a solemn vow: never again. The pursuit of truth, the documentation of the past, and the unwavering demand for recognition remain the driving forces for the survivors and their descendants. The dust of Somaliland still swirls, but now, mixed with the echoes of remembrance, it carries the silent cries of those who perished and the enduring resolve of those who survived, a haunting testament to a dark chapter in human history. Case 3. Summer 2002. Soham, a sleepy Cambridgeshire market town, basked in the kind of golden, languid warmth that seemed to stretch on forever, promising endless days of childhood freedom. 4 10-year-olds Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, best friends since nursery, this particular Sunday, August 4th, felt no different. The air hummed with the gentle thrum of village life, and the distant cheers from Old Trafford, where Manchester United and Newcastle were clashing, drifted through open windows. Both girls, passionate United fans, were wearing their replica red shirts, emblazoned with David Beckham's number 7, a shared symbol of their innocent devotion. The evening was unfolding, as many summer evenings do for children their age. They'd spent the day playing at Holly's house, a hub of laughter and youthful energy. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and violet, they decided to walk over to Jessica's house, just a short stroll away, to continue their games. It was around 6:30 p.m. when they stepped out of Holly's front door, their bright red shirts a vivid splash against the deepening twilight. A few minutes later, CCTV footage, chilling in its mundane capture of their last moments of freedom, showed them walking past the Soham Village College, their figures small and carefree. They were seen, a final, heartbreaking glimpse, near the local sports center, still in their distinctive shirts. And then, they vanished. The alarm was raised swiftly. When Holly didn't return home by 8 p.m., her parents, Kevin and Nicola Wells, began to worry. Calls to Jessica's home confirmed their worst fears. Jessica hadn't arrived there either. The initial frantic search by family and neighbors quickly escalated. The local police, alerted by the desperate families, launched a missing persons inquiry, but a creeping sense of dread was already settling over Soham. This wasn't a case of runaway teenagers. These were 2 young girls, 10 years old, in their own village, simply gone. The perpetrator, Ian Huntley, was a figure familiar, yet unsettlingly anonymous, within the small community. He was the caretaker at Soham Village College, a position that granted him access and a veneer of respectability. Age 28, Huntley lived in a modest semi-detached house on High Street, a property that came with his job. His partner, Maxine Carr, a teaching assistant at St. Andrew's Primary School, where both Holly and Jessica had been pupils, shared the house with him. On the surface, Huntley was just another face in the crowd, perhaps a little withdrawn, but nothing that screamed danger. Beneath that unremarkable facade, however, a predatory darkness festered. He had a history, albeit unproven, of sexual deviancy and an innate ability to manipulate and deceive. He was a man who craved control and who saw vulnerability as an invitation. The disappearance of Holly and Jessica became a national obsession. The media descended upon Soham, their cameras and microphones amplifying the palpable fear and hope that gripped the town. A massive police operation, codenamed Operation Fincham, was launched. Thousands of police officers, volunteers, and search and rescue teams scoured the surrounding countryside, fields, waterways, and abandoned buildings. Every ditch, every patch of woodland was meticulously examined. Photographs of Holly and Jessica, their innocent smiles plastered on every news outlet, became instantly recognizable across the UK. The red Manchester United shirts, once a symbol of their shared joy, became a poignant reminder of their absence. Huntley, with chilling audacity, inserted himself into the heart of the search. He was often seen talking to reporters, offering his sympathy and even giving interviews, feigning concern for the missing girls. He spoke of his shock and how the disappearances had affected him, all while knowing precisely where the girls were and what he had done. Maxine Carr, his loyal and deeply misguided partner, provided him with an alibi, claiming he had been with her at their home all evening. Her support, a crucial shield for his monstrous acts, allowed him to remain undetected for critical days. As the days bled into weeks, the hope that had sustained Soham began to wane. The initial theories, that they had run away, or that it was a stranger abduction, were slowly eroded by the lack of any credible sightings or demands. The focus began to narrow, turning inward, towards the community itself. Suspicion, a venomous snake, began to coil around certain individuals. On August 17th, 13 days after the girls vanished, the breakthrough, a horrific confirmation of the community's worst fears, finally came. A team of officers, following a lead on a suspicious vehicle, discovered two badly decomposed bodies in an irrigation ditch near Lakenheath, Suffolk, some distance from Soham. The remote location, a dense thicket of undergrowth, seemed to have been chosen for its isolation. The Manchester United shirts, though no longer bright, were still visible on the small bodies. The identification was swift and heartbreaking. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The forensic examination of the scene and the victims provided crucial, albeit grim, details. While the exact cause of death was difficult to ascertain due to the decomposition, it was clear they had suffered a violent end. Evidence pointed to Huntley as the last person to have seen them alive and, crucially, to have been involved in their deaths. The investigation now turned with laser-like precision on Huntley. The initial interviews, where he had played the role of the concerned neighbor, began to unravel. His alibi, provided by Carr, was meticulously scrutinized. Police discovered that Huntley had asked Carr to lie about his movements on the night of the disappearance, a fatal error that would ultimately betray his guilt. He had also cleaned his house meticulously, a detail that raised immediate red flags. Furthermore, officers noted his unsettling calmness during questioning, a stark contrast to the agitated grief displayed by the girls' families. On August 17th, the same day the bodies were found, Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr were arrested. The news ripped through Soham like a raw wound. The caretaker, the man who lived amongst them, the man who had pretended to care, was the monster they had been searching for. The motive, though never fully articulated by Huntley, was chillingly clear: opportunity, power, and a depraved sexual urge. It was revealed that he had lured the girls into his house under some pretext, likely to clean a cut Holly had sustained, and then subjected them to a horrific ordeal before killing them to silence them. The trial of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr began at the Old Bailey in London in October 2003. The nation watched, horrified, as the gruesome details of the crime were laid bare. The prosecution presented a compelling case against Huntley, meticulously detailing the forensic evidence, the inconsistencies in his story, and the damning testimony of Maxine Carr, who, in a desperate attempt to salvage her own reputation, eventually admitted to lying to the police about his alibi. The prosecution argued that Huntley had enticed the girls into his house, where he murdered them. The exact sequence of events inside the house remained elusive, as Huntley refused to provide a full account, but the evidence pointed to a violent sexual assault followed by strangulation or suffocation. He then stored their bodies in his loft for a period before driving them to the secluded ditch and disposing of them. The cleanup of his house, particularly the bathroom, was presented as an attempt to destroy evidence. Maxine Carr's role was complex and deeply disturbing. While she was not present during the murders, her actions in providing a false alibi for Huntley were critical in allowing him to evade detection for crucial days. The The prosecution contended that she was aware of his guilt, or at the very least, strongly suspected it, and chose to protect him. Her testimony during the trial, often evasive and tearful, painted a picture of a woman caught between loyalty and self-preservation. The defense, for Huntley, attempted to argue that the deaths were accidental, that Holly had fallen and hit her head in his bathroom, and Jessica had screamed, prompting him to silence her. This narrative, a desperate attempt to mitigate his responsibility, was utterly rejected by the jury and the public alike. The sheer brutality of the act, the calculated disposal of the bodies, and the subsequent attempts to cover his tracks screamed of premeditation and malice. On December 9, 2003, after a trial that gripped the nation, Ian Huntley was found guilty of the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The judge, Justice Moses, sentenced him to 2 life sentences, with a recommendation that he never be released, a whole life order. The relief that swept through the courtroom was palpable, but it was a cold comfort for the Wells and Chapman families, whose lives had been irrevocably shattered. Maxine Carr was found guilty of perverting the course of justice for providing Huntley with a false alibi. She was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, a sentence that many felt was lenient given the enormity of her deceit. She was later released from prison under a new identity due to the perceived threat to her life. The Soham murders left an indelible scar on the national psyche. It forced communities to confront the chilling reality that evil can reside in plain sight, behind a facade of normalcy. For the families of Holly and Jessica, their lives became a perpetual testament to loss and grief. The tragedy led to a profound reevaluation of safeguarding procedures in schools and a renewed focus on child protection. The image of the 2 young girls in their bright red football shirts, walking innocently into the fading light of a summer evening, remains a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected of places and the devastating consequences of a monster hidden in plain sight. Soham, a name once synonymous with sleepy English charm, became forever etched in public memory as the site of an unspeakable crime, a chilling fable of lost innocence and a community's profound agony. Case 4. The chill wind of December 20th, 1968, whipped across Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California, a secluded lover's lane where the world felt miles away. 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen, high school sweethearts, were sharing a quiet moment in David's Rambler. The festive spirit of the holiday season was in the air, a stark contrast to the terror about to unfold. Their innocent evening, a tableau of youthful romance, was shattered around 11 p.m. when a car pulled up alongside them. A figure emerged, armed and menacing. Without warning, shots rang out. David, attempting to flee, was shot in the head. Betty Lou, running for her life, was struck 5 times in the back. Their bodies lay crumpled by the roadside, the first victims of a nightmare that would grip Northern California for years. The only sound left was the distant hum of traffic, fading into the night. The initial investigation by the Solano County Sheriff's Office was a frantic scramble. 2 teenagers, murdered execution style in a quiet rural spot. There were no witnesses, no apparent motive, just 2 lives extinguished without a trace of the killer. The mystery deepened, casting a long shadow over the ordinarily peaceful communities of Vallejo, Benicia, and Napa. 6 months later, on July 4th, 1969, the sense of dread intensified. In the bustling parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, Darlene Farron, a vibrant 22-year-old newlywed, and her 19-year-old friend, Michael Majo, were parked, enjoying the warm summer night and the distant fireworks. Around midnight, a light-colored car pulled up behind them. A man exited, approaching their vehicle with a powerful flashlight, blinding them. He fired 5 shots from a 9mm Luger, striking both Darlene and Michael. Darlene died at the scene, her life extinguished amidst the celebration. Michael, though gravely wounded, survived, his memory of the encounter a chilling glimpse into the face of their assailant. A white male, stocky, with a round face. Less than an hour later, at 12:40 a.m. on July 5th, the phone rang at the Vallejo Police Department. A calm, chilling voice on the other end delivered a message that would echo through decades of unsolved mystery. "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last Christmas at Lake Herman Road. The voice belonged to the killer, announcing his presence, linking the two seemingly unconnected attacks. This was not a random act of violence. It was a deliberate, taunting declaration. The terror truly began to bloom on August 1st, 1969. 3 letters arrived at the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each letter contained a detailed confession to the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs murders, boasting of the killings and providing details only the killer would know. But more disturbing than the confessions were the accompanying ciphers, complex, cryptic messages demanding publication on pain of further killings. Each letter was signed with a cross circle, a symbol that would forever be associated with the name the killer chose for himself. This is the Zodiac speaking. The media, caught between public safety and the killer's demands, published the ciphers. The Chronicle and the Examiner received an additional demand. If the ciphers weren't published, the killer would embark on a killing rampage over the weekend. The fear in Northern California was palpable. Ordinary citizens, accustomed to the peace of their communities, found themselves gripped by a chilling dread. Could a killer truly be broadcasting his intentions, mocking the authorities with puzzles? The first cipher, the 408 symbol cryptogram, was quickly cracked by a high school teacher and his wife, Donald and Betty Harden. Its message was chilling. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. The motive was clear, a twisted, self-proclaimed divine right to kill, to collect souls for an afterlife of servitude. The Zodiac killer's taunts continued. On September 27th, 1969, the serene beauty of Lake Berryessa in Napa County became the scene of his most brazen attack yet. 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard, students enjoying a picnic, were approached by a man wearing a black executioner-style hood with clip-on sunglasses over the eye holes and a bib-like device on his chest adorned with the Zodiac symbol. He carried a gun and a knife. He bound the couple with clothesline, then, with chilling deliberation, stabbed them repeatedly. Brian was stabbed 6 times, Cecilia 10. Before leaving, the killer wrote on Hartnell's car door in black felt-tip pen, Vallejo/December 20th, 68/July 4th, 69/September 27th, 69/630/by knife. He then called the Napa County Sheriff's Office, calmly reporting the double murder attempt. Brian survived, but Cecilia succumbed to her wounds 2 days later. The meticulousness of the attack, the costume, the written message, all pointed to a killer reveling in his control, in his theatrical display of terror. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11th, 1969, the Zodiac struck in the heart of San Francisco. Hal Stein, a 29-year-old taxi driver, picked up a fare at the corner of Mason and Geary Streets. His last confirmed trip ended at Washington and Cherry Streets in the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. Stein was shot once in the head with a 9mm handgun. The killer, in another audacious move, then proceeded to tear a piece of Stein's blood-soaked shirt, a gruesome souvenir. Eyewitnesses, 3 teenagers across the street, initially mistook the act for a robbery. When they realized it was a murder, they called the police, providing a description of the killer. A white male, 25 to 30 years old, 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 9 inches, stocky build, wearing a dark brown jacket and reddish-brown straight hair. This was the most direct and crucial description of the Zodiac ever obtained. The Zodiac's reign of terror was unlike any before it. He didn't just kill, he communicated. He was a master of psychological warfare, using the media as a stage. His letters, filled with misspellings and idiosyncratic phrasing, continued to pour into newspaper offices and police departments. Each one was a twisted game, a puzzle, a threat. There was the 340 cipher, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in November 1969, which remained unsolved for over 50 years until December 2020. Another letter, known as the bus bomb letter, threatened to blow up a school bus full of children. His communications varied wildly in tone, from arrogant boasting to self-pitying complaints. He claimed to be collecting slaves for the afterlife, but the true depths of his depravity and delusion remained hidden behind the intricate ciphers and mocking letters. The investigation became a monumental task. The Vallejo Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and the San Francisco Police Department were all involved, often sharing information, sometimes hindered by jurisdictional boundaries. Detectives like Dave Tashi and Bill Armstrong of the SFPD and Ken Narlow of the Napa County Sheriff's Office became obsessed with the case, dedicating years of their lives to hunting the Phantom Killer. The FBI was brought in to assist with cryptanalysis and handwriting analysis. The taunting letters provided vital clues. His unique writing style, his use of specific phrases, the distinctive cross-circle symbol. But these were often the only clues. Fingerprints lifted from some of the letters proved inconclusive or belonged to postal workers. The recovered weapons were never definitively linked to a suspect. Dozens of suspects were investigated, their lives turned upside down by the relentless pursuit of the Zodiac. One prominent suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher from Vallejo, garnered significant attention due to circumstantial evidence. He lived near some of the crime scenes, was obsessed with the movie The Most Dangerous Game, which featured a man hunting humans, and allegedly confessed a desire to kill couples to a friend. However, crucial evidence, such as his fingerprints and handwriting, never conclusively matched the Zodiac's. Allen consistently denied his involvement and died in 1992, never being officially charged. The Zodiac's letters continued sporadically into the early 1970s. His claims of victim numbers grew increasingly outlandish: 17, 37, a never-ending tally. The last confirmed Zodiac letter was sent in 1974, a final chilling communication to the San Francisco Chronicle, claiming to be me and hinting at more to come. And then, as abruptly as he had appeared, the Zodiac went silent. The letters stopped. The murders ceased. The case remained open, a cold case that haunted the collective consciousness of California and beyond. Generations of detectives, true crime enthusiasts, and amateur sleuths pored over the evidence, the ciphers, the letters, hoping to find the missing piece of the puzzle. The lack of resolution only amplified the mystique and terror surrounding the Zodiac. He became a boogeyman, a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of the darkest impulses of humanity. The Zodiac Killer was not just a murderer. He was a performance artist of terror, a meticulous communicator who reveled in his ability to manipulate the press and taunt law enforcement. His motive, as expressed in his own chilling words, was a twisted vision of a heavenly afterlife, a personal hell for his victims, and a thrilling game for himself. His identity remains perhaps the most enduring mystery in American criminal history. He vanished into the shadows of the late 20th century, leaving behind a trail of blood, cryptic messages, and the enduring question: who was the Zodiac? And will his true identity ever be revealed? The answer, for now, remains shrouded in the very ciphers he created, a final, unsolvable riddle from a killer who delighted in leaving behind his terrifying mark. Case 5. The sun had set on Iguala, a city in the Mexican state of Guerrero, on the evening of September 26, 2014. For the 100-plus students of the Raul Isidro Burgos Rural Normal School of Ayotzinapa, a teacher's college renowned for its radical leftist leanings and history of social activism, this night was to be a routine exercise in protest. They were en route to Mexico City, planning to commemorate the anniversary of the 1968 Tlatelolco massacre, a dark stain on Mexico's history where government forces opened fire on student protesters. To fund their journey and attend the demonstration, a common practice for the institution, they had commandeered several public buses. They were young men, many from impoverished, rural backgrounds, their faces alight with the idealism and fire of youth, dreaming of becoming teachers and agents of social change in a country yearning for it. They were dressed in ordinary clothes, carrying the hopes of their families and the weight of their institution's revolutionary spirit. They could not have known the terror that lay in wait. As their caravan of buses navigated the winding streets of Iguala, a city known for its deep entanglement with organized crime, the air thickened with an unspoken tension. What began as a routine act of borrowing buses, a practice tolerated by authorities in the past, quickly descended into a nightmare. Around 9 p.m., municipal police from Iguala, heavily armed, intercepted the student-filled buses. The air immediately filled with the deafening cracks of gunfire, the shattering of glass, and the desperate cries of the students. It was an ambush, brutal and without warning. The initial confrontation was a scene of utter chaos. Some students, caught in the crossfire, fell dead. Others, wounded, scrambled for cover, their youthful bravado replaced by sheer terror. Among those killed in the first volley of attacks was Aldo Gutierrez Solano, shot in the head, and Julio Cesar Ramirez Nava, who died later from his injuries. A football team, Los Avispones, caught in the crossfire on another bus, also suffered casualties, including their bus driver, Victor Manuel Lugo Ortiz, and player, David Josue Garcia Evangelista. The brutality was indiscriminate. In the ensuing pandemonium, another student, Julio Cesar Mondragon Fontes, a 22-year-old first year, managed to escape the initial fusillade. His body was found hours later, abandoned by the roadside, his face flayed and his eyes gouged out, a grotesque signature of unimaginable cruelty, a message from the abyss. This act alone signaled that this was no ordinary police crackdown. It was something far more sinister, something orchestrated by forces beyond the rule of law. Amidst the hail of bullets and the screams, the municipal police rounded up 43 of the Ayotzinapa students. Eyewitness accounts, fragmented and harrowing, spoke of the students being forced into police vehicles, their hands bound, their faces pale with fear. They were last seen alive in the custody of those sworn to protect them, their red buses riddled with bullet holes, left abandoned on the road like discarded husks. The world watched, aghast, as 43 young men simply vanished into the night. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and desperate searching. Parents, many from impoverished indigenous communities, arrived in Iguala, their hearts torn between hope and a gnawing dread. Their sons, full of life and dreams just hours before, were gone. The local authorities, initially denying their involvement, quickly became the primary suspects. At the center of this horrifying web was Jose Luis Abarca Velasquez, the then mayor of Iguala, and his wife, Maria de Los Angeles Pineda Villa. Abarca, a figure notorious for his alleged ties to organized crime, particularly the Guerreros Unidos cartel, was widely believed to have ordered the attack. The motive, though debated, centered on the students' possible disruption of a political event hosted by Pineda Villa that night. Or perhaps, a more insidious theory, that one of the commandeered buses unwittingly contained a shipment of heroin belonging to the cartel. Whatever the trigger, Abarca's order to teach them a lesson translated into brutal, lethal action. The Guerreros Unidos, a powerful and ruthless drug cartel operating in Guerrero, were the primary enforcers. They operated with a chilling impunity, their power intertwined with local government and security forces. Many of the municipal police officers were, in essence, cartel operatives in uniform, a grim testament to the deep-seated corruption that plagued the region. This blurring of lines between state actors and criminal organizations was a terrifying reality, and the Ayotzinapa students became its most tragic victims. The initial investigation launched by the Mexican government, under then-President Enrique Peña Nieto, was met with immediate and profound skepticism. Attorney General Jesus Murillo Caram presented what he termed the historical truth in January 2015. This official narrative claimed that the 43 students, after being abducted by municipal police, were handed over to the Guerreros Unidos cartel, who then killed them, incinerated their bodies in a massive bonfire at a garbage dump in Cocula, and tossed their charred remains into a nearby river. This explanation, offered with a sense of finality, was meant to close the case. But the families of the disappeared students, their raw grief fueling an unyielding resolve, refused to accept this historical truth. They, along with international human rights organizations, pointed to glaring inconsistencies, a lack of credible evidence, and the suspicious speed with which the government sought to close the investigation. Forensic experts brought in by the families contradicted the possibility of such a large-scale incineration at the Kokula dump, citing the extreme heat and massive amount of fuel required. Furthermore, only fragments of 3 students' remains were ever positively identified from the purported dump site. The families cried foul, accusing the government of a cover-up, of attempting to bury the truth along with their sons. The call for justice reverberated across Mexico and the world. Vivos se los llevaron, vivos los queremos. They took them alive, we want them back alive, became the rallying cry of the parents and their supporters. Marches filled the streets, murals of the 43 adorned walls, and the image of their missing faces became a symbol of Mexico's human rights crisis. Under international pressure, an interdisciplinary group of independent experts JEI, appointed by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, was allowed to conduct an independent investigation. Their findings systematically dismantled the historical truth, exposing torture of witnesses, fabrication of evidence, and a deliberate obstruction of justice by Mexican authorities, including federal agencies. The JI revealed that crucial evidence, such as the surveillance of the students by military intelligence even before the attack, was withheld. This raised chilling questions about the complicity of higher-level authorities, including the military, in the disappearance. The experts pointed out that the military had information about the students' movements and the attacks, but failed to intervene. The investigation became a tangled web of lies, corruption, and the grim reality of state-embedded crime. Subsequent revelations pointed to the involvement of various levels of government and law enforcement, not just the municipal police. Federal police, state police, and even elements of the Mexican army were alleged to have been present during the attacks, or to have actively participated in the subsequent cover-up. The sheer scale of coordination required to abduct and disappear 43 individuals underscored a vast and intricate network of complicity. Years passed, and the case remained an open wound. Jose Luis Abarca and his wife, Maria de Los Angeles Pineda Villa, were eventually arrested, with Abarca charged with kidnapping and other crimes. Many police officers and alleged cartel members were also detained. However, the precise fate of the 43 students continued to elude definitive answers. The families, undeterred, continued their agonizing search, combing remote areas for clandestine graves, refusing to give up on their sons. The Ayotzinapa case became a tragic paradigm of Mexico's profound human rights crisis, a nation grappling with an epidemic of enforced disappearances and the systemic impunity enjoyed by those who commit such atrocities. It laid bare the deep-seated corruption that allowed criminal organizations to infiltrate and manipulate state institutions, turning those sworn to protect citizens into their executioners. The case shone a harsh light on a broken justice system, where truth is often sacrificed for political expediency. Today, 10 years later, the whereabouts of the 43 Ayotzinapa students remain largely unknown. Only a few bone fragments have been definitively identified, offering fragments of closure for only a handful of families. For the vast majority, the waiting continues, a perpetual torment. The memory of those 43 young men, driven by dreams of a better future, serves as a poignant and agonizing reminder of the price of complicity, the depths of state-sanctioned violence, and the enduring fight for truth and justice in a nation scarred by a crime that refuses to be forgotten. The red buses sit as monuments of what was, but the question of what happened to the 43 screams unanswered into the Mexican sky, a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love and a nation's unhealed wound. Case 6. The year was 1993, and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, was a city of stark, vibrant contrasts. Beneath the majestic Sugarloaf Mountain and the outstretched arms of Christ the Redeemer, a dark underbelly of poverty, inequality, and violence festered. The streets, particularly around the Grand Candelaria Church in the city center, were home to hundreds of meninos de rua, street children, their lives a daily struggle for survival. Many were orphans, runaways, or abandoned, living off begging, petty theft, and often in desperate circumstances, prostitution. They slept on cardboard boxes, their only shelter the grand steps and alcoves of the historic church, their innocence stripped away by the harsh realities of their existence. They were largely invisible to the powerful, yet a constant, uncomfortable presence for those who walked the bustling streets of Rio. Among these children were figures like 20-year-old Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento, already a veteran of the streets, his face etched with hardship beyond his years. There was Paulo Roberto de Oliveira, a younger boy, perhaps 11 or 12, who dreamed of a life away from the concrete. These were not just statistics. They were individuals with names, dreams, and a desperate yearning for something more. They were vulnerable, yes, but also resilient, forming their own makeshift families on the unforgiving asphalt. The night of July 23, 1993, began like any other for the children huddled around Candelaria Church. The cool night air offered little comfort, but the proximity to each other provided a semblance of security. They were a diverse group, some sleeping soundly, others whispering stories, others still watching the city lights with a weary vigilance. Earlier that day, some of the children had been involved in an altercation with police officers. A police car window had been broken, an act of defiance that, in the brutal calculus of Rio's streets, often carried severe repercussions. The atmosphere among the street children was a mixture of fear and a fatalistic acceptance of their precarious lives. As the clock edged past midnight, a sinister silence descended upon the plaza. Around 1 a.m. on July 24th, a dark Chevrolet Opala, without license plates, crept silently towards the church. Inside were several off-duty military police officers, their faces hardened by a corrupt system, their intentions chillingly clear. They were not there to serve and protect. They were there to exact a brutal retribution. Suddenly, the night exploded. The vehicle stopped abruptly, and masked figures, armed with pistols and shotguns, emerged. Without a word, they opened fire on the sleeping and stirring children. The silence was instantly replaced by the terrifying symphony of gunfire, the cries of the wounded, and the desperate screams of children trying to flee. It was a massacre, cold-blooded and indiscriminate. Paulo Roberto de Oliveira, only 11 years old, was among the first to fall, shot in the head. Another, Marcelo Candido de Jesus, just 14, was shot while trying to escape. They collapsed on the steps of a church, their young lives extinguished in a hail of bullets. The children scattered in every direction, some running towards the safety of nearby alleyways, others diving under parked cars, their small bodies shaking with terror. The shooters were relentless. They pursued the fleeing children, gunning them down without mercy. In total, 8 children were murdered that night. 6 were killed on the steps of the church, their blood staining the historic stone. 2 more were taken from the nearby Museum of Modern Art, where they had sought refuge, driven to a remote location, and executed. Among the survivors, many were wounded, their bodies riddled with bullets, their minds scarred forever by the horror they had witnessed. Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento, who would later achieve a grim notoriety, survived the massacre, but the trauma would forever haunt him, shaping his tragic trajectory. The morning after revealed a scene of unspeakable horror. The steps of Candelaria Church, usually a hub of activity, were strewn with young bodies, their lives violently snuffed out. The sight shocked Brazil and horrified the international community. This was not a gangland shooting or a random act of violence. It was an execution, a calculated extermination of society's most vulnerable. The immediate investigation, handled by the Rio de Janeiro Civil Police, was slow and initially riddled with suspicion of a cover-up. However, the sheer brutality of the crime, coupled with mounting national and international outrage, forced authorities to act. Human rights organizations, both local and global, immediately condemned the massacre and demanded justice. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and local groups like the Center for Justice and International Law Sigil put immense pressure on the Brazilian government. The perpetrators were identified as military police officers, off-duty but acting with the implicit understanding that their actions would go unpunished. The motive was clear: a clean-up operation, a macabre form of social cleansing targeting the undesirables of the city. The broken police car window was simply a convenient pretext. The real motivation was a deep-seated contempt for the poor, a desire to eliminate what was perceived as a blight on the city's image, especially with Rio preparing to bid for major international events. Among the perpetrators, several names emerged. Sergeant Marcos Vinicius Borges Emanuel, Corporal Arlindo Magalhães, and Marcus Aurelio Borges Emanuel, the sergeant's brother, also a former police officer, were among the key figures implicated. Their profiles painted a picture of men corrupted by power, operating within a culture of impunity that had long plagued Brazilian law enforcement. They were part of a larger, systemic problem of police brutality and extrajudicial killings that disproportionately affected the poor and marginalized. The investigative process was arduous. The survivors, terrified and traumatized, were key witnesses, but their testimonies were often difficult to obtain and fraught with danger. The police culture of silence and protection of their own made progress agonizingly slow. However, the international spotlight on the case provided an unprecedented impetus. In 1995, after a lengthy trial, Marcos Vinicius Borges Emanuel was convicted of 7 of the 8 murders and sentenced to 309 years in prison. Arlindo Magalhães was also convicted and sentenced to 243 years. Marcus Aurelio Borges Emanuel received a lesser sentence, but was also found guilty. Several other officers were acquitted due to lack of evidence, a source of enduring frustration for the victims' families and human rights advocates. The convictions, while a significant victory, were not without their challenges. Brazil's legal system, with its complex appeals process, meant that the perpetrators continued to fight their sentences for years. The Candelária massacre had a profound and lasting impact on Brazilian society. It became a symbol of police brutality, social inequality, and the state's failure to protect its most vulnerable citizens. It galvanized human rights movements, pushing for greater accountability for police violence and advocating for the rights of street children. The case also brought international condemnation, forcing Brazil to confront the grim realities of its human rights record on a global stage. For the survivors, the trauma lingered. Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento, one of the few who lived to tell the tale, later became a notorious figure in another, equally tragic event: the 2000 hijacking of Bus 174 in Rio de Janeiro, where he held passengers hostage before being killed by police. His life, from Candelária to the bus hijacking, became a grim parable of a society that fails its most vulnerable, turning victims into perpetrators, their lives spiraling into violence and despair. The Candelária massacre remains a chilling reminder of the state's capacity for violence against its own citizens, particularly the marginalized. It exposed the deep-seated issues of corruption, impunity, and the criminalization of poverty in Brazil. While justice was served for some of the victims, the underlying systemic problems persist. The names of the 8 children, Paulo Roberto de Oliveira, Marcelo Candido de Jesus, Anderson de Oliveira Pereira, Valdivino Miguel de Almeida, Luis Carlos Almeida de Silva, Leandro Botelho de Silva, Marcos Antonio de Silva, and Rogério Rodrigues de Silva, are etched into the conscience of a nation, forever challenging it to remember the innocent lives lost and to strive for a future where no child is left asleep on the steps of a church, vulnerable to the brutal indifference of the night. The steps of Candelária Church stand today, not just as a monument to faith, but as a stark memorial to a night of unimaginable horror, a night when the cries of children were silenced by the very forces sworn to protect them. Case 7. The air in Hamburg, Germany, on a sweltering summer day in June 1984, carried the usual urban hum, distant traffic, the murmur of conversations, the faint cries of gulls from the bustling port. But for the small, unassuming family of Grabowski, the ordinary drone of daily life was about to be shattered by an act of unfathomable cruelty that would ripple through German society for decades. Klaus Grabowski, a quiet, diligent man in his early 30s, and his young, spirited daughter, 7-year-old Breda, were on their way to the children's playground. For Breda, it was a day of innocent anticipation, a promise of swings touching the sky and slides racing to the ground. For Klaus, it was a simple, joyful outing with his beloved child. They were just an ordinary father and daughter, their lives woven into the fabric of everyday German life, unaware that they were about to become unwilling players in a dark, twisted drama. The perpetrator, Lutz Reinstrom, was a man who lived in the shadows, a monster cloaked in the mundane. At 46 years old, Reinstrom was a self-employed businessman, seemingly respectable. He owned a small business, a facade that concealed a deeply disturbing secret. Beneath the veneer of normalcy lay a meticulously crafted and soundproofed bunker, a torture chamber hidden beneath his property in Hamburg's borough of Rahlstedt. This wasn't merely a space for dark fantasies. It was a horrifying reality, equipped with restraints, cameras, and instruments of unimaginable depravity. Reinstrom was a predator of the most chilling kind, driven by sadistic urges and a chilling desire for control. He had a history, though not publicly known, of previous sexual assaults, a pattern of escalating violence and meticulous planning. He moved through society undetected, his true nature a grotesque secret shielded by his seemingly unremarkable existence. The fateful encounter occurred on June 22, 1984. Klaus and Breda Grabowski were walking through a park in Rahlstedt, heading towards the playground. Reinstrom, cruising in his white delivery van, spotted them, his predatory gaze fixed on Breda. He stopped, feigning engine trouble, and then, with a practiced ease, offered them a ride, claiming he could give them a lift to the playground. Klaus, likely seeing an opportunity to save his daughter from the summer heat and a long walk, accepted this seemingly kind gesture. It was a decision born of innocent trust, a fatal error that would lead them directly into the jaws of hell. Once inside the van, Reinstrom's demeanor shifted. The pretense dropped, and the true horror began to unfold. He quickly subdued Klaus, likely with a sudden, overwhelming attack. It's believed he then drugged Breda, possibly by force-feeding her sedatives. The van, rather than heading to the playground, instead drove directly to Reinstrom's property, to the meticulously concealed entrance of his subterranean lair. The timeline of the abduction was terrifyingly swift, transitioning from a normal afternoon outing to a horrifying captivity in mere minutes. Inside the bunker, the true extent of Reinstrom's depravity was unleashed. For days, Klaus and Breda were subjected to unimaginable torture and sexual abuse. The details, later revealed in the trial, were so horrific that they sent shockwaves through Germany. Reinstrom meticulously documented his crimes with cameras and audio recordings, a chilling testament to his twisted self-gratification and desire to relive his acts. The victims, father and daughter, were forced to endure unspeakable acts, their bond of protection grotesquely inverted by their tormentor. The soundproofing of the bunker ensured that their screams, their pleas, their terror remained unheard by the outside world. As the days turned into a week, the Grabowski family, along with the Hamburg police, launched a desperate search. Initial efforts focused on typical missing persons procedures, but as time dragged on, a deepening sense of dread set in. There were no ransom demands, no sightings, no leads. The disappearance was eerily silent, as if Klaus and Breda had simply vanished into thin air. The breakthrough, ironically, came from a seemingly unrelated event. On July 1st, 1984, 9 days after the abduction, a man named Klaus Peckerl, a business associate of Reinstrom, was reported missing. Peckerl had gone to Reinstrom's property to collect a debt. This second disappearance, combined with Reinstrom's strange behavior, began to raise red flags. Investigators looking into Peckerl's disappearance inevitably stumbled upon the dark secret lurking beneath Reinstrom's property. On July 2nd, 1984, police arrived at Lutz Reinstrom's house. What they discovered sent shivers down the spines of even hardened officers. During the search, they found the entrance to the hidden bunker. Inside, the scene was one of unimaginable horror. The bodies of Klaus and Breda Grabowski were found, their ordeal tragically over. The sheer scale of Reinstrom's methodical depravity, revealed by the torture devices, the restraints, and the incriminating recordings, was almost beyond comprehension. They also found evidence that Klaus Peckerl had met a similar, brutal end, his body also hidden within the macabre lair. The revelation of the soundproof chamber and its contents stunned investigators. It was clear this was not a spontaneous act, but a meticulously planned and repeatedly executed cycle of violence. Lutz Reinstrom was immediately arrested. During his interrogation, he remained largely unrepentant, exhibiting a chilling lack of remorse. His demeanor was calm, almost detached, as he described his crimes, a testament to his severe psychopathy. He confessed to the murders of Klaus and Breda Grabowski, as well as Klaus Peckrell, and the unspeakable acts he had committed. The details that emerged from his confession and the evidence found in the bunker painted a picture of a man consumed by sadistic desires, a true monster next door. The trial of Lutz Reinstrom began in 1985 in Hamburg and quickly became a media sensation, gripping Germany with its horrifying revelations. The prosecution presented an overwhelming amount of evidence: the bodies of the victims, the meticulous recordings found in the bunker, and Reinstrom's own chilling confessions. The focus of the trial was not on Reinstrom's guilt, which was undeniable, but on the precise nature of his crimes and his psychological state. Forensic psychologists and psychiatrists testified to his severe personality disorders, describing him as a highly intelligent but extremely dangerous sadist. The court heard agonizing details of the prolonged torture endured by Klaus and Breda, leading to their deaths, though the exact cause for each remained difficult to determine given the nature of the abuse. The victims, Klaus and Breda, were largely overshadowed by the monstrosity of their killer during the sensational proceedings. Their lives were tragically cut short, their memory forever linked to the unspeakable acts committed against them. Klaus, a loving father, had attempted to protect his daughter even in the face of his own torment. Breda, a bright and innocent child, became the most vulnerable victim of a predator's dark fantasy. Their suffering highlighted the ultimate betrayal of trust, the horrific consequences of a seemingly innocuous invitation. On January 27, 1986, Lutz Reinstrom was found guilty on multiple counts of murder and aggravated sexual assault. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, a verdict that was met with a collective sigh of relief across Germany. The court also ordered his subsequent indefinite preventative detention, a measure reserved for offenders deemed a continuing danger to society, ensuring he would never again walk free. Reinstrom's case joined a horrifying pantheon of serial killer narratives, but with a unique and particularly disturbing element: the elaborate, custom-built torture chamber, a testament to his methodical planning and unbridled depravity. The bunker killer case, as it became known, left an enduring scar on German society. It shattered a sense of security, forcing people to confront the chilling reality that pure evil could exist hidden behind a suburban facade. It prompted discussions about the dangers of trusting strangers, even seemingly benevolent ones, and raised questions about how such a meticulously planned and executed series of crimes could go undetected for so long. The Criminological Research Institute of Lower Saxony later studied the case extensively, attempting to understand the psychological profiles of such offenders and to prevent similar tragedies. For the family of Klaus and Breda Grabowski, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but no true peace. Their lives were irrevocably altered by the horrific abduction and murders. The memory of Breda, a vibrant child who simply wanted to play, and Klaus, a devoted father, remains a poignant reminder of the innocence lost and the unimaginable pain inflicted by one man's monstrous desires. The silent bunker in Rahlstedt, once a hidden chamber of horrors, stands as a chilling testament to the capacity for human evil, a dark stain on the landscape of German true crime, forever etched in the annals of its most disturbing cases. Case 8. The Chilling Whisper of a Winter Night in Delhi, December 16, 2012, carried an undercurrent of something sinister. The city, usually bustling, seemed to hold its breath. It was a Sunday, and for 23-year-old Jyoti Singh, a bright and ambitious physiotherapy intern, it was a rare night of leisure. She had spent the evening with her male friend, Avnindra Pratap Pandey, at a mall in Saket, enjoying the cinematic spectacle of Life of Pi. The film's tale of survival against impossible odds would tragically foreshadow the fight for her own life that was about to begin. Jyoti, known posthumously as Nirbhaya, the Fearless One, was the embodiment of hope for her lower-middle-class family. Hailing from a small village in Uttar Pradesh, her parents had made immense sacrifices, her father working double shifts to ensure his only daughter received a good education and the chance to escape the cycle of poverty. Jody was on the cusp of fulfilling her dreams, a promising career stretching before her. She was a beacon, a symbol of the aspirations of countless young women in India, daring to reach for a better future. As the movie concluded, Jody and Avnindra sought transport back home. At the Munirka bus stand, a seemingly ordinary white private bus, emblazoned with a charter sign, pulled up. A young man, barely more than a boy, waved them aboard, assuring them it was headed towards Dwarka. The fare, a mere 10 rupees each, seemed a small price for a quick ride. But as the doors hissed shut, a terrifying shift in the atmosphere occurred. The bus, rather than a legitimate public transport, was a predator in disguise, a roving den of depravity driven by men whose souls had long been lost to darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of alcohol and malice. 6 men lurked in the shadows. Ram Singh, the 35-year-old bus driver, a man with a criminal history and a chilling presence. His brother Mukesh Singh, 26, who sometimes helped as a cleaner. Vinay Sharma, a seemingly unassuming 19-year-old gym assistant. Pawan Gupta, a 19-year-old fruit seller. Akshay Thakur, a 26-year-old unemployed man, and a juvenile, merely 17, whose innocence was a grotesque facade. These were not seasoned criminals, but a collection of men from marginalized backgrounds, their lives steeped in frustration and a disturbing sense of entitlement. Their profiles painted a picture of men adrift, perhaps failed by a system that offered little opportunity, but whose depravity that night transcended any social explanation. They were driven by a brutal, unadulterated misogyny, a festering contempt for women that exploded into unimaginable violence. The bus veered off its advertised route, plunging into the dark, deserted byways of Delhi. Jody and Avnindra's unease morphed into terror as the men inside, their faces contorted by alcohol and a predatory hunger, began to mock and harass them. Avnindra, attempting to shield Jody, bravely confronted them. His defiance was met with immediate, brutal force. He was savagely beaten with an iron rod, gagged, and left unconscious, his body battered and broken. Then, their monstrous attention turned to Jody. What followed was an hour of unimaginable horror. Jody was dragged to the rear of the bus, beaten mercilessly with the same iron rod that had felled her friend. In a chilling tableau of unimaginable cruelty, all 6 men took turns in a prolonged, brutal gang rape. The attack was not merely sexual. It was an act of sadistic torture, a visceral display of power and dehumanization. The iron rod, a tool of industry, became an instrument of unspeakable torment, thrust in her body, tearing her intestines, inflicting injuries so catastrophic that they defied comprehension. All the while, Ram Singh continued to drive the bus through the silent, indifferent streets of the capital, a mobile chamber of horrors. After enduring over an hour of this unimaginable torment, Jody and Avnindra, their bodies ravaged and barely clinging to life, were finally dumped naked and bleeding on the roadside near the Mahipalpur flyover. The winter night air, once crisp, now bit into their exposed skin, offering no comfort, only the stark reality of their abandonment. It was a passerby, shocked by the grotesque scene, who discovered them and alerted the police. The investigation began immediately, spurred by the sheer barbarity of the crime and the outrage it ignited. The victims were rushed to Safdarjung Hospital, where doctors battled to save Jody's life. Her internal injuries were catastrophic. She had lost 80% of her intestines. Despite her agonizing pain and the trauma she had endured, Jody, with incredible courage, managed to give a statement to the police describing her attackers and the horrific events on the bus. This testimony would prove crucial in the swift identification and apprehension of the perpetrators. The police, racing against time, quickly identified the white bus. Within hours, the initial arrests began. On December 17th, Ram Singh, the driver and mastermind, along with his brother Mukesh Singh, Vinay Sharma, and Pawan Gupta were apprehended. The juvenile was nabbed on December 21st from the Anand Vihar bus terminal. The final accused, Akshay Thakur, was traced to his village in Bihar and arrested on December 21st to 22nd. The swiftness of the arrests, fueled by public pressure and the clear evidence, was a testament to the determination of the Delhi police. But even as the perpetrators were rounded up, Jyoti's fight continued. Her condition, however, deteriorated rapidly. The world watched, horrified, as doctors fought to save her. On December 26th, in a desperate attempt to give her a fighting chance, she was airlifted to Mount Elizabeth Hospital in Singapore, a facility renowned for its advanced medical care. Yet, despite the best efforts of medical professionals, the damage was too severe. On December 29th, 2012, 13 days after the horrific assault, Jyoti Singh succumbed to her injuries. Her death sent a tsunami of grief and anger across India and around the globe. The death of Nirbhaya ignited an unprecedented firestorm of protest. Lakhs of people poured onto the streets of Delhi and other major cities, demanding justice, safer cities for women, and systemic change. India, a nation grappling with its deep-seated patriarchal norms, was forced to confront the ugly reality of gender-based violence. The public outcry was deafening, a collective roar that reverberated through the corridors of power. The legal process moved with unusual speed, fueled by the national outrage. A fast-track court was established to ensure a swift trial. On January 3, 2013, the police filed a charge sheet against the 5 adult accused, detailing charges of murder, gang rape, attempt to murder, kidnapping, unnatural offenses, and dacoity. The trial commenced on January 17th. The juvenile accused was tried separately by the Juvenile Justice Board, which on August 31, 2013, found him guilty of gang rape and murder and sentenced him to the maximum 3 years in a reform home, a verdict that many found shockingly lenient. Tragedy struck again during the trial when, on March 11, 2013, Ram Singh, the alleged ringleader, was found dead in his cell in Tihar jail, a suspected suicide. While his death complicated the trial, it did not halt the pursuit of justice for the remaining adult accused. On September 10, 2013, the fast-track court delivered its verdict. Mukesh, Vinay, Akshay, and Pawan were found guilty of 13 offenses, including gang rape, unnatural offenses, and the murder of Jyoti Singh, as well as the attempt to murder her male friend. 3 days later, on September 13th, the court delivered the ultimate sentence: death by hanging for all 4 convicts, declaring the case to be in the rarest of rare category, justifying capital punishment due to its extreme brutality. The convicts appealed their sentences, moving through the higher courts of India. The Delhi High Court upheld the death penalty on March 13, 2014, reaffirming the trial court's decision. Still, the legal battle continued, extending for years through various appeals, review petitions, and even a curative petition to the Supreme Court. The appeals were systematically dismissed, each higher court reaffirming the heinous nature of their crime and the justice of their sentence. The long march to justice finally culminated on March 20th, 2020. After years of legal maneuvering, delays, and desperate attempts by the convicts to evade their fate, Mukesh Singh, Vinay Sharma, Pawan Gupta, and Akshay Thakur were hanged at Tihar jail at 5:30 a.m. For many, it was the culmination of a protracted and agonizing wait, a moment of profound relief and a symbolic closure to a case that had shaken the conscience of a nation. The Nirbhaya case became a watershed moment in India's history, igniting a national conversation about women's safety, gender inequality, and the need for stricter laws against sexual violence. It led to significant legislative changes, including the Criminal Law Amendment Act, 2013, also known as the Nirbhaya Act, which broadened the definition of rape, increased penalties, and introduced new offenses like stalking and voyeurism. The case also spurred the creation of the Nirbhaya Fund, aimed at financing initiatives for women's safety. While the impact of these changes remains a subject of ongoing debate, the Nirbhaya case undoubtedly brought the issue of violence against women to the forefront of India's national consciousness, a stark and painful reminder of the darkness that can lurk within society and the tireless fight required to bring light. Case 9. The oppressive humidity of a Thai summer, June 1998, hung heavy over Bangkok, a city known for its vibrant street life and serene temples. But beneath the veneer of bustling markets and golden spires, a chilling story was about to unfold, one that would expose the dark underbelly of ambition, deceit, and ultimately, murder. It began with the quiet disappearance of a young woman, a disappearance that would quickly spiral into a national sensation, unveiling a plot so depraved it defied belief. Jinjara Plungunsri was a beacon of grace and intelligence, a 23-year-old medical student from the prestigious Mahidol University. Bright-eyed, ambitious, and deeply loved by her family, Jinjara embodied the hopes and dreams of a middle-class Thai family. She was on the verge of completing her medical degree, a path she had chosen with dedication and a genuine desire to help others. Her future, once so clear and promising, stretched out before her, filled with the promise of a fulfilling career and a life well lived. Her family, particularly her mother, had invested everything in her education, seeing in Jinjara not just a daughter, but the embodiment of their collective aspirations. She was known for her quiet determination, her studious nature, and a trusting heart, a quality that, tragically, would lead to her undoing. The last time Jinjara was seen alive was on June 27, 1998. She had told her family she was meeting her boyfriend, a man named Dr. Wizit Bunkasimsani. The very mention of his name had brought a subtle unease to her family. Wizit, a seemingly accomplished physician, was 37 years old, a respectable obstetrician-gynecologist at Bangkok's Police General Hospital. On the surface, he was everything a family might desire for their daughter: educated, professional, and seemingly stable. However, there were whispers, vague, disquieting feelings about his past, an air of mystery that Jinjara, in her youthful optimism, had perhaps overlooked. Wizit was, in fact, a man of considerable intellect, having graduated from the Faculty of Medicine at Chulalongkorn University. He projected an aura of sophistication and success, traits that undoubtedly appealed to Jinjara. Yet, behind the veneer of professionalism, Wizit harbored a chilling darkness. He was known for his controlling nature, a manipulative streak that he skillfully concealed. More critically, he was a man entangled in a web of financial complications and a secret life, a life that included a wife and child, a truth he had painstakingly hidden from Jinjara. His motive, as it would tragically emerge, was a cold, calculated desire to escape financial burdens and the complications of his double life, seeing Jinjara as a stepping stone to a better, unencumbered future, or rather, a barrier to it. The initial days after Jinjara's disappearance were fraught with anxiety. Her family, unable to reach her, contacted Wizit, who calmly stated he hadn't seen her since their last meeting. His composed demeanor, though seemingly reassuring, struck a discordant note with Jinjara's increasingly frantic mother. The family, driven by a gnawing dread, filed a missing person report. The investigation began, initially as a routine missing persons case. Police questioned Wizit, who maintained his innocence, offering plausible explanations for his movements. He was a doctor, after all, a respected figure, and his alibi seemed to hold up. But as the days turned into a week, then two, the details of Jinjara's disappearance began to gnaw at the investigators. There was no trace, no ransom note, no credible sightings. The absence of any leads created a vacuum, a space that the police, seasoned by Bangkok's complex criminal underworld, knew often meant something far more sinister than a simple runaway. The crucial turning point in the investigation came not from direct evidence, but from the relentless persistence of Jinjara's mother, who harbored a profound distrust of Wizit. Her maternal instinct screamed that he was involved. She pressured the police, recounting every detail of Jinjara's relationship with Wizit, the secrecy, the subtle manipulations. She recalled a particularly disturbing incident. Jinjara had once mentioned Wizit had offered her a significant sum of money, allegedly to help her family with medical expenses, an offer that seemed out of place given their relatively short relationship. This seemingly innocuous detail, initially dismissed, would later become a critical piece of the puzzle. Acting on the mother's intuition and the growing inconsistencies in Wizit's story, the police decided to delve deeper into his financial affairs. What they unearthed was a shocking revelation. Wizit was deeply in debt. facing mounting pressure from creditors. He had also recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Jinjira, with himself as the sole beneficiary. The timing was chilling. The policy had been activated just weeks before Jinjira's disappearance. This discovery shattered Wizit's carefully constructed facade of innocence. The motive, stark and brutal, began to emerge. Financial gain, cloaked in the guise of love. With a strong motive now established, the police intensified their surveillance of Wizit. They observed his movements, noted his unusual calmness, and began to scrutinize his home and his clinic with renewed suspicion. It was a seemingly ordinary detail that ultimately sealed his fate. Colleagues at the hospital had noted Wizit's unusual interest in purchasing a large amount of formalin, a chemical commonly used to preserve anatomical specimens. His explanation, that it was for hospital use, was vague and unconvincing given his specific role. The amount he purchased was excessive for routine medical practice. On July 28, 1998, a month after Jinjira's disappearance, armed with a search warrant and a growing sense of dread, police raided Wizit's home in a quiet Bangkok suburb. The initial search yielded nothing immediately incriminating. But as they expanded their search to the outdoor areas, a pungent, sickly sweet odor began to permeate the air. It was the unmistakable smell of decaying flesh, masked by the acrid scent of chemicals. The source was a large, plastic water tank, commonly used for storing rainwater, located in the backyard. What they found inside the tank would horrify even the most hardened investigators. Submerged in a mixture of water and formalin was the dismembered body of Jinjira Plorngunsri. Her beautiful features were gone, her body mutilated in an attempt to prevent identification and decompose the remains. The sight was gruesome, a testament to the cold depravity of the perpetrator. It was a scene ripped from the pages of a macabre novel, made all the more chilling by the clinical precision of the dismemberment, a skill undoubtedly possessed by a medical professional. The discovery sent shockwaves through Thailand. The nation watched in horrified fascination as the details of the crime unfolded. Wizit Bunkasimsani was immediately arrested. Under intense interrogation, facing irrefutable evidence and the overwhelming weight of his monstrous act, he confessed. The confession, however, was not one of remorse, but a calculated narrative, an attempt to mitigate his culpability. Wizit revealed a chilling timeline of the crime. On June 27, 1998, the day Jinjira disappeared, he had met her as planned. He then drove her to his home, where he had meticulously prepared for her murder. In a cold, premeditated act, he had administered an overdose of a sedative, likely to incapacitate her. Once she was unconscious, he strangled her, extinguishing her bright young life with his own hands. His motive, he confessed, was the life insurance policy he had taken out on her, worth $10 million, bought approximately $250,000 at the time, a sum that would have significantly eased his financial burdens. But the horror did not end with her death. Over the next few days, in a macabre display of his medical knowledge and utter lack of humanity, Wizit systematically dismembered Jinjira's body in his bathroom. He used surgical precision, cutting her into manageable pieces, presumably to facilitate disposal and prevent identification. He then stored the remains in the water tank, hoping the formalin would accelerate decomposition and destroy any forensic evidence. His plan was meticulous, designed to be foolproof, but his arrogance and lack of foresight regarding the persistent efforts of Jinjira's family and the police ultimately led to his downfall. The investigation that followed the discovery of Jinjira's body was meticulous. Forensic experts painstakingly pieced together the fragments of evidence from Wizit's home, corroborating his chilling confession. The presence of formalin, the surgical precision of the cuts on the body, the life insurance policy, all converged to paint an undeniable picture of premeditated murder. The details of the dismemberment, the clinical coldness with which a doctor had violated his Hippocratic oath, sickened the public. The trial of Dr. Wizit Bunkasimsani became a national spectacle. The courtroom was packed daily, with media outlets providing minute-by-minute coverage. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Wizit's financial desperation, his manipulative deception of Jinjira, and the chilling premeditation of the murder. Jinjira's grieving family provided tearful testimonies, painting a vivid picture of the vibrant young woman whose life had been so cruelly cut short. Wizard, throughout the trial, maintained a stoic demeanor, occasionally attempting to portray himself as a victim of circumstance or to downplay the extent of his depravity. His defense team attempted to argue for diminished responsibility, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The sheer brutality and calculated nature of the crime left little room for doubt. On November 16, 1999, more than a year after Jinjira's body was found, the criminal court delivered its verdict. Dr. Wizit Bunkasimsani was found guilty of premeditated murder and concealing a body. The court, citing the extreme cruelty and the calculated nature of the crime, sentenced him to death. The verdict brought a collective sigh of relief for many Thais who had followed the case with bated breath, eager for justice to be served. However, the legal saga of Wizit Bunkasimsani was far from over. As is common in Thailand, the death sentence is subject to automatic appeal. The case moved through the appellate courts, each stage bringing renewed attention to the chilling details of the crime. The Court of Appeals upheld the conviction and death sentence on October 25, 2001. Yet, Wizit continued to exercise his legal rights, filing further appeals to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in its final ruling on the case, once again affirmed the lower court's findings of guilt for premeditated murder. However, in a surprising turn, the Supreme Court, in 2004, commuted his death sentence to life imprisonment. The reasoning for the commutation was complex, often involving consideration of factors such as the defendant's cooperation during the investigation, the limited and the perceived potential for rehabilitation, a common practice in the Thai judicial system where death sentences are frequently commuted. The decision to commute the sentence sparked considerable public debate and disappointment, particularly among those who believed Wizit deserved the ultimate penalty for his heinous crime. For Jinjira's family, who had endured years of agonizing legal proceedings, the commutation was a painful blow, a feeling that justice, while delivered, was incomplete. Wizit Bunkasimsani remains incarcerated to this day, serving his life sentence. The tragic end of Jinjira Ploying serves as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk beneath seemingly respectable exteriors and the profound impact of calculated deceit and cold-blooded ambition. The case forever etched itself into the collective memory of Thailand, a chilling tale of a brilliant young life extinguished by a man who saw her not as a person, but as a means to an end, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow, outrage, and a haunting question about the true nature of evil. Case 10. The gentle hills of Tuscany, bathed in the golden light of the Italian sun, have long been synonymous with art, beauty, and romance. But for nearly 2 decades, from the late 1960s to the mid-1980s, these same idyllic landscapes became the hunting grounds of a chilling phantom, a killer whose nocturnal reign of terror earned him the infamous moniker, the Monster of Florence. This was not a spree killer, nor a sudden outburst of violence, but a methodical, ritualistic murderer who struck in isolated lovers' lanes, leaving behind a trail of horror, dismembered bodies, and an enduring mystery that continues to haunt Italy. The story begins in the oppressive heat of August 1968, in the quiet village of Lastra Signa, just outside Florence. Pasquale Gentilcore, a 31-year-old construction worker, and Barbara Lacci, a 32-year-old housewife with a reputation for casual affairs, were found dead in Gentilcore's Alfa Romeo Giulietta. Both had been shot with a .22 caliber Beretta pistol. Initially, the crime was attributed to Lacci's jealous husband, Stefano Mele, who confessed to the murders under duress and was subsequently convicted. But a deeper, far more sinister truth lay buried beneath the surface. The initial investigation, flawed and perhaps hasty, failed to recognize the unique signature of the true killer, the .22 caliber Beretta and, crucially, the post-mortem mutilation of the female victim. Lacci's pubic area had been excised. This gruesome detail, largely overlooked or misinterpreted in 1968, would become the chilling hallmark of a killer who was just beginning his reign. For 6 years, the Tuscan countryside seemed to breathe easy, oblivious to the dormant horror waiting to reawaken. Then, In September 1974, near Borgo San Lorenzo, a quiet town northeast of Florence, the monster struck again. Stefania Pettini, 18, and Pasquale Galetta, 19, young lovers parked in a secluded spot, were brutally murdered. Both were shot with the same .22 caliber Beretta used in the 1968 killings. But this time, the ritualistic element was undeniable and horrific. Pettini's body had been subjected to extensive post-mortem mutilation, with her pubic area and left breast excised. The police, finally connecting the dots, realized the serial killer was at large. The initial 1968 case, once closed, was reopened, revealing a pattern of horror that would terrorize Tuscany for years. The victims of the monster of Florence were, in essence, anonymous young couples seeking intimacy in the secluded lovers' lanes that dotted the Tuscan hills. They were ordinary people, their lives snuffed out without warning, their identities stripped away by the monster's brutal acts. They were chosen not for who they were, but for what they represented: vulnerable targets in isolated settings, offering the killer the perfect opportunity for his chilling rituals. They were the unsuspecting sacrifices to a dark, unfathomable compulsion. The perpetrator, however, remained a shadowy figure for years. The identity of the monster would become one of Italy's most enduring and frustrating criminal enigmas. The psychological profile that emerged from the crime scenes was that of a highly disturbed individual, likely male, with a profound sexual pathology and a methodical, almost ritualistic approach to his killings. The choice of victims, young couples, often engaged in sexual acts, suggested a deep-seated resentment or hatred towards intimacy, possibly stemming from personal trauma or a severe psychosexual disorder. The precise and brutal excisions indicated a knowledge of anatomy and a distinct, perverse ritual. The modus operandi pointed to someone who knew the rural areas intimately, moving silently and efficiently under the cover of darkness. The timeline of terror unfolded with chilling regularity, a macabre calendar marking the monster's progress. June 6, 1981, Scandicci, Giovanni Foggi, 30, and Carmela DiNuccio, 21, were found dead in their car. Again, the .22 caliber Beretta. Again, DiNuccio's pubic area was excised. The horrific pattern was now undeniably clear. The fear began to grip the region. October 23, 1981, Calanzano, Susanna Cambi, 24, and Stefano Baldi, 26, were found murdered in their car. Cambi, like the previous female victims, was subjected to brutal post-mortem mutilation. The panic intensified. June 19, 1982, Bacchino, Montes Bertoli, Antonella Migliorini, 20, and Paolo Mainardi, 22, were murdered. The .22 caliber pistol again. The mutilation was present. The authorities were desperate. September 9, 1983, Giagali, Scandicci, 2 German tourists, Horst Meyer, 24, and Uwe Rush, 24, were the next victims. Unusually, both male victims were killed. Rush's body was subjected to post-mortem mutilation. The monster's reach was extending, its audacity growing. July 29, 1984, Vicchio, 2 French tourists, Jean-Michel Crevecolai, 25, and Nadine Mariette, 36, were camping in a secluded area. They were shot, and Moriet's body was extensively mutilated. This attack was particularly daring, occurring in a more open setting. September 8, 1985, Scopiti, San Casciano, and Val di Pesa. This was the final, and perhaps most infamous, double murder attributed to the monster. French lovers, Jean-Pierre Kroll, 25, and Sophie Mellon, 24, were found dead in their tent. Mellon's body was horribly mutilated, with both breasts and the pubic area excised. The horror reached its peak. The investigation process was a labyrinthine nightmare, plagued by missteps, internal conflicts, and a relentless public clamor for answers. Initially, the police struggled to comprehend the nature of the serial killings, often pursuing leads based on conventional motives rather than recognizing the pathological rituals. The first break, linking the 1968 case to the 1974 murders, was a crucial, albeit delayed, realization. The early years of the investigation, particularly after 1974, focused on known sex offenders and individuals with violent histories in the region. The lack of forensic technology sophisticated enough to quickly identify a single killer from ballistic evidence, combined with the isolated nature of the crime scenes, made progress excruciatingly slow. The .22 caliber Beretta was the constant, a phantom signature that led them nowhere. The press, initially slow to grasp the magnitude of the terror, soon dubbed the killer El Mostro di Firenze, the Monster of Florence, a name that conjured images of a mythological beast preying on the innocent. The media frenzy, while fueling public fear, also put immense pressure on the authorities. One of the most significant early leads came in the form of what became known as the Sardinian Trail. Between 1980 and 1982, police focused their attention on a group of Sardinian immigrants, including Francesco Narducci, a respected Perugia doctor who was found dead in Lake Trasimeno in 1985 under suspicious circumstances. The theory was that a Sardinian gang was responsible, possibly linked to the 1968 murder through Stefano Mele, who had Sardinian ties. Several arrests were made, including one Pietro Pacciani, a reclusive and unsavory character from the village of Mercatale, known for his violent temper and history of sexual offenses. Pacciani became a central figure in the investigations, his life scrutinized under a powerful microscope. Pacciani was a man whose life was steeped in controversy and disturbing incidents. Born in 1925, he had a history of violence dating back to his youth, including a conviction for murder in 1951 after he killed a man he caught having sex with his fiancée. He was also accused of sexually abusing his daughters, a detail that further solidified his image as a depraved individual in the public eye. His farm was searched extensively, yielding some suspicious objects, though no definitive direct links to the murders were found at first. However, the monster struck again in 1985, while Pacciani was already under suspicion. This led to a desperate reevaluation of the Sardinian Trail and a broadening of the investigation. The focus shifted, but Pacciani remained a person of intense interest. The mid-1980s saw the emergence of a new approach, led by prosecutor Silvia Della Monica, and later by the charismatic and often controversial chief investigator, Michele Gittari. The Sardinian Trail began to crumble, and a new theory emerged, that the monster was a single killer, possibly aided by a small number of accomplices, but driven by a deeply personal, ritualistic pathology. It was during this period that the infamous sniffers, or compagni di merende, picnic companions, entered the narrative. These were individuals who, like Pacciani, were seen as having some connection to the rural world and a history of deviant behavior. Gittari's theory was that a small, depraved circle of men, driven by sadistic sexual urges and possibly linked to occult practices, were behind the killings. The most prominent of these sniffers were Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti, both acquaintances of Pacciani. Vanni, a former postman, was known for his crude demeanor and often bizarre testimonies during questioning. Lotti, a petty criminal, was mentally unstable and often provided convoluted and contradictory accounts, but he eventually gave crucial, albeit unreliable, testimony that implicated himself, Pacciani, and Vanni. Lotti claimed to have been present at several of the murder scenes, acting as a lookout, and identified Pacciani as the primary killer and mutilator. His testimony, delivered in a rambling and often confused manner, was met with skepticism but also offered tantalizing, if circumstantial, details. The investigations into Pacciani gained momentum. In 1994, Pacciani was finally brought to trial for 8 of the 16 murders attributed to the monster. The evidence against him was largely circumstantial. Lotti's testimony, some vague witness accounts placing him near crime scenes, and the finding of a bullet casing from a .22 caliber Beretta at his farm, but was never definitively linked to the murder weapon. Despite the lack of direct forensic evidence linking him to the murders, Pacciani was convicted in 1994 and sentenced to multiple life terms. The public rejoiced, believing the monster had finally been caged. However, Pacciani's legal battle was far from over. In 1996, the conviction was overturned on appeal, citing insufficient evidence. Pacciani was set free, only to die a few months later, in 1998, under suspicious circumstances, officially from a heart attack, but leaving many questions unanswered. The acquittal of Pacciani and his subsequent death threw the entire investigation back into chaos. The public, who had embraced the idea of Pacciani as the monster, were left disillusioned. But the prosecutors, particularly Gittari, were convinced that Pacciani was not alone. They continued to pursue the sniffer's theory. Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti were then tried for their alleged involvement in the murders, based largely on Lotti's erratic testimony. In 1998, Vanni was convicted of 4 of the monster murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. Lotti, who turned state's evidence, received a reduced sentence. Vanni died in prison in 2002. The trials of Pacciani, Vanni, and Lotti were fraught with controversy, marked by dramatic courtroom confrontations, sensational media coverage, and intense public scrutiny. The evidence against them was often circumstantial, relying on often unreliable testimony and the absence of clear forensic links. Critics argued that the police, under immense pressure to solve the case, had focused too heavily on a limited number of suspects, overlooking other possibilities and potentially fabricating evidence. The elusive .22 caliber Beretta, the true signature of the monster, was never definitively found. Its absence remained a glaring hole in the prosecutions. The motives behind the gruesome mutilations also remained largely unexplained beyond speculative psychological profiles. Was it a satanic cult, as some theories suggested? Was it simply the manifestation of a disturbed individual's psychosexual fantasies? The official explanations were often unsatisfying to a public hungry for clarity. The Monster of Florence case eventually closed with the convictions of Vanni and Lotti. Yet, for many, the true identity of the monster, or the full extent of any potential conspiracy, remains shrouded in mystery. There are still lingering doubts, alternative theories, and the persistent feeling that a piece of the puzzle is missing. Some believe the true killer was never caught, or that the official narrative only scratched the surface of a larger, more complex network. The shadows of suspicion have fallen on various individuals, from a pharmacist with connections to a strange sect to the aforementioned Dr. Francesco Narducci, whose death was later reinvestigated. The impact of the Monster of Florence case on Italy was profound. It shattered the illusion of idyllic rural life, exposing a chilling darkness beneath the surface. It highlighted the challenges of serial killer investigations in an era predating modern forensic science, and it sparked a fierce debate about justice, circumstantial evidence, and the pressure on law enforcement to deliver answers. The case became a cultural touchstone, spawning books, documentaries, and even films, forever cementing the Monster of Florence as one of the most enigmatic and terrifying true crime stories in Italian history, a haunting tale of unspeakable horror that continues to linger in the beautiful, yet scarred, Tuscan landscape. Case 11. The vibrant, historic heart of Florence, a city synonymous with art, Renaissance, and timeless beauty, often holds a darker, less celebrated reality for some of its inhabitants. Beneath the majestic domes and ancient bridges, a struggle for survival often plays out in the shadows. It was in one such shadow, on a bright Monday morning, March 5, 2018, that the fragile peace of the city was shattered by an act of senseless violence, claiming the life of Idi Dain, and exposing the harsh undercurrents of racial tension and social disenfranchisement that simmered beneath Florence's picturesque facade. Idi Dain, a 54-year-old Senegalese street vendor, was a familiar and largely benign presence on Lungarno Arcabisieri, near the iconic Ponte Vecchio. He was one of many informal sellers, predominantly African migrants, who lined the Arno River, offering small trinkets, scarves, and souvenirs to tourists. Idi was a man of quiet dignity, known for his gentle demeanor and his struggles to eke out a living in a foreign land. He had lived in Italy for over 2 decades, having arrived from Senegal in the mid-1990s, hoping for a better life. Despite his long residency, he often struggled with integration, a common plight for many migrants who find themselves on the fringes of Italian society, facing precarious work and social isolation. He sent money home to his family in Senegal, his remittances a lifeline across continents. He was not a confrontational man, but a survivor, navigating the complex landscape of street vending in a city protective of its image. His life, while modest, was driven by the universal desire for stability and a future for his loved ones. His killer, Riccardo Viti, was a stark contrast to Idi dying in almost every conceivable way, yet their paths tragically converged in an act of brutal, unprovoked violence. Viti, a 48-year-old Italian man from the Florence area, was a figure steeped in personal demons and social alienation. He was a known drug addict, battling long-term addiction and mental health issues. His life was a spiral of petty crime, desperation, and growing paranoia. He harbored deep-seated resentment and a simmering anger, fueled by his own failures and a disturbing cocktail of drug-induced delusions. Viti was unemployed, a drifter living off the fringes of society, his existence marked by a profound sense of grievance and a volatile unpredictability. He was a person teetering on the edge, a tragic product of societal neglect and personal destruction. His profile was that of a man consumed by his own misery, seeking an outlet for his internal chaos, and tragically, he found it in an unsuspecting victim. The morning of March 5, 2018, began like any other for Idi dying. He had set up his modest display of goods near the Ponte Vecchio, hoping to make enough sales to get through the day. The tourist crowds were beginning to swell, and the city hummed with its usual morning rhythm. The timeline of the crime was tragically swift and brutal, unfolding in a matter of terrifying seconds. Around 10 a.m., Lungarno Archibusieri, Riccardo Viti, already agitated and likely under the influence of drugs, approached Idi dying. Accounts would later suggest Viti was in a highly confused and aggressive state. He began to harass Idi, seemingly unprovoked, his words slurred and accusatory. The exact nature of their brief interaction before the attack remained somewhat unclear, but it was clear that Viti's aggression was directed at Idi without apparent reason. The attack. Suddenly, without warning, Viti produced a large knife, a common kitchen or hunting knife, and plunged it into Idi Dain's chest. The attack was swift, forceful, and devastating. Idi had no time to react, no opportunity to defend himself. The blade struck a vital organ, causing massive internal bleeding. Immediate aftermath. Idi Dain collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely. The suddenness of the attack stunned onlookers, who had been enjoying the morning serenity. Viti, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and confusion, then fled the scene, leaving his dying victim on the pavement. The scene instantly transformed from picturesque to horrific. Onlookers and emergency response. Panic erupted. Tourists and passers-by rushed to Idi's aid, some attempting to administer first aid, others frantically calling for emergency services. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes, but the wound was severe. Despite their efforts, Idi Dain's life ebbed away rapidly. He was pronounced dead at the scene, his life extinguished in a senseless act of violence in the heart of a city renowned for its beauty. The investigation process began immediately, driven by the urgency of a public murder in a highly visible location. The crime scene was quickly secured, and witnesses, many of whom were tourists from various countries, were interviewed. The presence of numerous eyewitnesses was a crucial factor that significantly aided the swift apprehension of the perpetrator. Eyewitness accounts and description. Several people had seen the attack unfold, and their consistent descriptions of the assailant were invaluable. They described a man of Italian appearance, roughly in his late 40s, with a distinctive gaunt look suggesting drug use. His aggressive demeanor and the direction of his escape were also noted. CCTV footage. Florence is equipped with a comprehensive network of CCTV cameras, particularly in its high-traffic tourist areas. Investigators immediately began reviewing footage from cameras positioned along Lungarno Archibusieri and the surrounding streets. The cameras captured Viti's approach, the attack, and his subsequent flight, providing clear visual evidence of his movements and appearance. This footage corroborated eyewitness accounts and allowed police to track his escape route. Rapid manhunt. With clear descriptions and CCTV evidence, a citywide manhunt was launched. Police flooded the area, scouring nearby streets, parks, and known drug haunts. The urgency was palpable. A killer was on the loose, and public fear was mounting. Apprehension. Within hours of the murder, Riccardo Viti was apprehended. He was found not far from the crime scene, in a highly agitated and confused state, still exhibiting signs of drug intoxication. He was identified by both eyewitnesses and through the matching of his appearance to the CCTV footage. He was arrested and taken into custody for questioning. Confession and motive. During interrogation, Viti confessed to the murder. His confession, however, was tangled with drug-induced delusions and a disturbing lack of clear motive. He claimed to have been annoyed or provoked by iodine, though no specific interaction that would justify such a brutal attack was ever substantiated. His statements indicated a deep-seated paranoia and a general animosity towards migrants, a sentiment that had been simmering in Italian society. While not explicitly framed as a hate crime in legal terms, the underlying xenophobia and Viti's generalized aggression towards a visible other were undeniable subtext to the violence. The prosecution would argue that his drug addiction and psychological instability were major contributing factors, but the choice of victim, a vulnerable African migrant, was not coincidental. The murder of Idi Dain sent shockwaves through Florence and across Italy. It ignited a fierce national debate about racism, the precarious lives of migrants, and the systemic issues surrounding drug addiction and mental health. Migrant communities, already feeling marginalized, expressed profound grief and anger, viewing Idi's death as a stark example of the dangers they face daily. Public outcry and protests. Thousands took to the streets of Florence in the days following the murder. A massive demonstration was held, led by migrant communities and joined by Italian citizens, politicians, and civil rights activists. They marched in solidarity with Idi Dain's family, demanding justice and an end to xenophobia and racial discrimination. The cry "Justice for Idi" echoed through the historic piazzas, transforming the city's mournful silence into a resounding call for change. Legal proceedings. Riccardo Viti was charged with aggravated murder. The trial focused on his mental state and the specific circumstances of the attack. While his drug addiction and psychological issues were acknowledged, the prosecution argued that he was still culpable for his actions. The court had to weigh the elements of premeditation against the impulsive nature of a drug-fueled rage. Verdict and sentence. In October 2018, Riccardo Viti was found guilty of murder. The court acknowledged his diminished capacity due to drug use and psychological distress, but ultimately deemed him responsible. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The sentence, while significant, was a point of contention for many, who felt it was lenient given the unprovoked and fatal nature of the attack, particularly against a vulnerable individual. The legal process aimed to balance culpability with the complexities of mental health and addiction, but for many, it did not fully address the racial undertones of the crime. The murder of Idi Dain became a symbol, a tragic focal point for broader societal issues. It exposed the vulnerabilities of migrant communities in Italy, often living on the margins, facing prejudice and economic hardship. It also brought to light the devastating impact of untreated addiction and mental illness, and the tragic consequences when these issues intersect with social animosity. Florence, a city that prides itself on its openness and beauty, was forced to confront the uglier aspects of its social fabric. The shadow cast by Idi Dain's murder lingered, a stark reminder that even in the most beautiful of places, darkness can emerge from unexpected corners, highlighting the urgent need for greater social integration, mental health support, and a renewed commitment to combating the insidious forces of racism and xenophobia. Idi Dain's tragic end became a powerful, albeit painful, catalyst for reflection, a poignant plea for empathy and justice in a world too often divided by fear and misunderstanding. Case 12. The biting wind whipped through the desolate Rostov-on-Don forest, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and an unspoken dread. It was the winter of 1982, and a chill far deeper than the weather had begun to settle over the Rostov Oblast. Children, bright-eyed and full of the simple joys of Soviet life, were vanishing. Not just disappearing, but vanishing into a void of unspeakable horror, leaving behind a trail of fear and a community gripped by an insidious terror. At the heart of this burgeoning nightmare was a man named Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, a seemingly unassuming, bespectacled family man, a former teacher and party member. To those who knew him, he was quiet, perhaps a little awkward, but certainly not the embodiment of evil. Born in 1936 in the Ukrainian SSR, his early life was marked by the famine of the 1930s, an experience he later claimed contributed to his psychological torment. He suffered from impotence, a source of profound shame and inadequacy that festered within him. This private humiliation, coupled with a deep-seated resentment and a perverted sexual drive, would eventually erupt in a brutal, decade-long reign of terror that would stain the annals of Russian history. His first known victim, 9-year-old Lena Zakharova, disappeared on December 22, 1978, in Shakhty, a small town near Rostov. Her body was found days later, mutilated beyond recognition. The brutality of the act was shocking, a harbinger of the monstrous acts to come. Lena, like so many of Chikatilo's future victims, was a child on the cusp of adolescence, innocent and vulnerable. Her life, extinguished so cruelly, became the first brushstroke in a macabre portrait of suffering. The authorities, accustomed to more conventional crimes, initially struggled to comprehend the nature of these disappearances. Soviet society, with its official narrative of stability and safety, was ill-equipped to acknowledge the existence of a serial killer, especially one so depraved. Early investigations were hampered by bureaucratic inertia, a reluctance to share information between different police districts, and the pervasive belief that such a phenomenon simply could not exist in the Soviet Union. This systemic blindness provided Chikatilo with a grotesque cloak of invisibility, allowing him to stalk his prey with chilling impunity. The victims were varied, yet shared a common thread of vulnerability. Most were children, often runaways or those from troubled homes, who were easily lured by the promise of candy or a friendly face. Others were teenagers, or even young adults, often prostitutes or hitchhikers, who found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each one was a life tragically cut short, a family plunged into unimaginable grief. Boys like 13-year-old Oleg Tashnikov, found near a railway line in 1981, or 10-year-old Lyubov Volobyeva, discovered in a forest in 1984. Girls like 14-year-old Larissa Tkachenko, whose body was found by fishermen in 1985. Their names, once whispered in sorrow by their families, now stand as grim testament to the butcher of Rostov's insatiable bloodlust. Chikatilo's method was insidious in its simplicity. He frequented train and bus stations, places where vulnerable individuals were often alone and disoriented. He would approach them with a disarming smile, offering help, candy, or alcohol. His victims were often desperate for kindness, or simply unaware of the danger lurking beneath his mild demeanor. Once he had gained their trust, he would lead them to secluded areas, a forest, an abandoned building, a secluded corner of a park, where he would commit his heinous acts. The brutality of his crimes was staggering. Victims were often stabbed repeatedly, sometimes while still alive, and many were mutilated, their bodies desecrated in unspeakable ways. He would sometimes consume parts of their bodies, a horrifying detail that further cemented his monstrous reputation. The investigation, dubbed Operation Lesopolsa Forest Belt, was a desperate and increasingly urgent effort to catch the elusive killer. As the body count mounted, pressure on the police intensified. They began casting a wide net, interviewing thousands of people, setting up surveillance at train stations, and even deploying special forces. But Chikatilo was a master of disguise, blending effortlessly into the Soviet landscape. He meticulously cleaned up crime scenes, removing any forensic evidence, and his unassuming appearance allowed him to evade suspicion again and again. One of the most agonizing aspects of the investigation was the series of near misses and missteps. In 1984, Chikatilo was actually arrested for a minor offense at a train station. He had bloodstains on his clothes and was carrying a knife. Crucially, his blood type was AB, and it was known that the killer's semen found at crime scenes was also AB. However, a police error led to his release. The initial test on his blood was flawed, and because he was impotent, his semen lacked sperm, leading investigators to mistakenly believe he could not have been the source of the seminal fluid. This devastating error allowed him to walk free, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives. Another critical hurdle was the lack of reliable forensic techniques in the Soviet Union at the time. DNA profiling, a crucial tool in modern serial killer investigations, was not yet widely available. Instead, investigators relied on blood typing, fingerprint analysis, and witness testimonies, often unreliable in high-stress situations. The political climate also played a role. The official narrative of a crime-free socialist society made it difficult to acknowledge the existence of a widespread serial killer, leading to a slow and often contradictory response from the authorities. As the years dragged on, the body count climbed to an unthinkable 53 confirmed victims, though the true number is believed to be higher. Each new discovery sent ripples of fear through the community, turning parents into hyper-vigilant guardians and transforming the familiar landscape into a sinister hunting ground. The Rostov region became a place where children were warned not to speak to strangers, where mothers clutched their children tighter, and where every shadow seemed to hold a terrifying secret. The breakthrough finally came in 1990. Following a strict order from Moscow, the KGB and militia police joined forces, implementing a more coordinated and systematic approach. They revisited old cases, re-interviewed witnesses, and meticulously cross-referenced every piece of information. They also began to use psychological profiling, a relatively new technique in the Soviet Union. A team of profilers, led by Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, accurately predicted many of Chikatilo's behaviors, including his method of luring victims and his preference for specific locations. Chikatilo, emboldened by his perceived invincibility, began to take more risks. On November 6, 1990, he was observed at a bus station in Rostov-on-Don, acting suspiciously. A policeman, Igor Rybakov, stopped him for a routine check. Rybakov noticed that Chikatilo had recently trimmed his mustache, a detail that had been circulated in a police bulletin as a characteristic of the killer. Chikatilo was taken into custody. The interrogation that followed was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. For days, Chikatilo maintained his innocence, calm and unyielding. The investigators, however, were relentless. They presented him with a mountain of circumstantial evidence, the inconsistencies in his alibis, and the psychological profile that painted a terrifyingly accurate picture of his inner demons. Finally, after more than 10 days, Chikatilo broke. He confessed, in chilling detail, to his horrific crimes. He led investigators to the graves of his victims, revealing the locations of bodies that had never been found, painting a macabre map of his brutal spree. His confession was a torrent of perversion and self-pity, a twisted narrative of an inadequate man seeking power and release through violence. He described his impotence, his sexual frustrations, and the voices that drove him to commit these unspeakable acts. His chillingly matter-of-fact descriptions of the murders sent shivers down the spines of hardened investigators. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo began on April 14, 1992. It was a sensation, a public spectacle that laid bare the darkest corners of human depravity. Chikatilo was held in a metal cage in the courtroom, his presence a stark contrast to the quiet, unassuming man he had once pretended to be. He often interrupted proceedings, ranting incoherently, making bizarre gestures, and, at times, even exposing himself. His behavior was so erratic that a psychiatric evaluation was ordered, but he was deemed sane and fit to stand trial. The evidence presented was overwhelming. Forensic reports, witness testimonies, and most damning of all, his own detailed confessions. On October 14, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death. The verdict brought a measure of relief to a traumatized nation, but it could never erase the scars left by his monstrous reign. After several appeals were rejected, Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head on February 14, 1994, in Novocherkassk prison. The case of Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov, remains a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk beneath an ordinary facade. It exposed the vulnerabilities of a society ill-prepared for such depravity and forced a painful reevaluation of justice and public safety in post-Soviet Russia. His victims, from the youngest child to the oldest teenager, serve as a solemn memorial to the dark decade when fear stalked the forests of Rostov-on-Don, and an unassuming man became the embodiment of unimaginable horror. The wind still whispers through those forests, but now it carries a silent warning, a testament to the lives extinguished too soon, and the lasting legacy of a killer who shocked a nation to its core. Thank you so much for watching tonight's True Crime Stories. I hope you found it as captivating as I did. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from tonight? And how did you feel about the story? Remember to stay safe, get some rest, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and good night.